G'day, welcome back to aKiwisProspective. Today we're going to be going over the recent BSA ruling, which has decided that it regulates the whole internet now. So we'll see how that goes for the platform. And we're also going to be looking over the fuel crisis, which is currently impacting the entire world, but also New Zealand in its own ways. And we're going to see if the government can be doing anything better. So let's just jump right in. To start off, we're going to do a summary clip regarding what's taking place with the BSA, which is the Broadcasting Standards Authority, for those who don't know. If you are a fan of online content and want to avoid the traditional media space, this is going to be very important to you guys. So let's just jump right in,
Well, Winston Peters is firing up at the Broadcasting Standards Authority. The New Zealand First Leader is accusing it of trying to police the entire internet after it said it had jurisdiction over Sean Plunkett's online show, The Platform. He says the regulator has gone too far, calling its latest move total fascist behaviour and insisting it should be scrapped altogether. And Media Minister Paul Goldsmith says that is something that the government is actively considering. Here is senior reporter Juliet Speedy with the story.
Sean Plunkett is not known for holding back on his show.
I would think the story I'm about to share with you was an April Fool's joke. It is certainly Orwellian and dystopian.
He's talking about a landmark decision that brings the platform under the BSA's jurisdiction. It is the first time the regulator has applied its powers to an online-only broadcaster. The ruling followed a complaint after Plunkett described Tikanga Māori as mumbo-jumbo.
So just before we keep going, the framing from stuff is quite interesting, how as if the decision made by the authority, the BSA, has made it final and that they are now able to implement what they believe is necessary, despite its original framework not incorporating today's online media landscape. As for those who don't know, it was set up in about 1989, which is a little wee while ago. That's like 2 of my lifetimes ago pretty much now. And it's very interesting to see them try to stay relevant in today's media space. I've got a bit more to say on that, but I just wanted to point that out. Let's keep going.
It's a decision that is wrong in law, wrong in process, and goes against the New Zealand Bill of Rights. It's a threat to free speech.
Winston Peters, a regular on the show, escalated the attack. He says the BSA has stepped into territory it was never designed for, posting online. The decision of the Broadcasting Standards Authority that it has jurisdiction over the platform is breathtaking in its audacity. It has single-handedly decided it knows better than the regulatory framework it operates under and that it should regulate the entire internet in New Zealand. That is an egregious case of overreach and total fascist behaviour. The BSA has crossed a line. Peters doubled down on Plunkett's show.
Bordering on fascist behaviour. Frankly, they should go. They should be abolished.
ACT agrees.
Look, it's a creature of 1989, before the internet existed. We live in a different world today and it's clearly overstepping its mandate.
So before we let this keep going, it is quite nice to see 2 of our coalition government partners agreeing on something. The concern that I have is the framing that we're gonna dive in a bit more towards the end of this clip, of how this is an outdated way to deal with this issue. And we'll talk about the implications of that quite shortly.
Media Minister Paul Goldsmith says the government is weighing its options.
We could leave it as it is to let the courts decide work its way through the system, or we could change the legislation, or we could abolish the BSA, and that's something that the government could consider.
The Prime Minister denies giving Plunkett personal assurances.
Sean Plunkett said that you personally gave him a guarantee that you'd have his back on this one.
Oh, look, we have not interfered in this process at all.
The BSA has responded, telling us for over 20 years we've called for Parliament to update the Broadcasting Act. Until that happens, we must apply the law as it is. The BSA must consider a complaint if it meets the Act's definition of a broadcast. This is the first we've had about an online broadcaster that meets that definition. This decision confirms online broadcasters that host regularly scheduled programming for audiences to tune into, and the way we've always consumed TV and radio are broadcasters and subject to standards. We've made no ruling yet on whether the platform's content has breached standards. Plunkett calls his show a digital media site and calls himself a journalist, but says he's not subject to broadcasting standards because, in his words, he's not a broadcaster, he's a webcaster.
I'm concerned for other people who choose to communicate through the internet, that one day the BSA will decide they don't like them and subject them to the kangaroo court they're trying to subject me to.
That's just another interesting framing from stuff here. I think it represents the thought process regarding this conflict between a branch of the government and an individual's right to freedom of speech. And it's very interesting that the argument is framed through the platform's position. And I don't know, not by the members of parliament who disagree with it, who are currently in government. I find it quite interesting that they're trying to make this out as if it's just one singular individual who is hitting heads against the BSA that has been around for a long time and regulates like it would do on a day-to-day basis as read out. This is just normal, but clearly it's not. It's quite interesting to me that this framework that the BSA's response was put under was because it is consumed by the public like you would TV or radio. It therefore falls under the broadcasting standards, which is a very interesting distinction for the BSA to make. It's quite telling that they view a platform that you have to seek out yourself and access yourself and take in on your own time as the same as a set time and date TV or radio schedule that when the BSA was set up at the time was designed to regulate when certain things could be on at certain times of the day, which you could definitely make an argument for, especially, you don't want adult content that explicitly shows themes and images that could be a detriment to a child's development being played at 7 o'clock in the morning while the kids are getting ready for school, or at 5 o'clock at night when they've gotten home and they've finished their homework. That is the comparison that the BSA are trying to make in order to justify their position in regulating an individual's freedom of speech online, which is a very big leap even to those who support this position, and scares me that they are trying to find what they can in existing law to regulate what is being said online because they don't agree with it. And that is what I think Sean means by the kangaroo court, that at the end of the day, whoever is sitting in the BSA can, if this is allowed to take place and is processed through the courts and is agreed to by the courts and that they can prosecute this complaint, which I would like to think that our law is better than that, but who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Another thing that stuff seems to leave out is that actually for this to be enforced, it needs to go through the courts in the first place, and the courts haven't agreed. They haven't even had an opportunity to process it under the new standard that the BSA has triumphed itself on having. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens moving forward regarding this complaint, and I would like to hope that this will be the beginning of the end for the BSA, and we can see a little bit more freedom and reassurance for online creators to be able to speak their mind without being prosecuted by a government who wants to regulate their thoughts. Anyway, we'll let this clip finish, eh?
The BSA was set up to enforce standards of journalism to protect the public. With misinformation and AI creations everywhere, some would argue we need the BSA more than ever. Others, including some politicians, say its time is done.
So that's another very interesting thing to end that little segment on, something that really stood out to me is not once again the framing, right? Once again, the people who were concerned about misinformation, something that the BSA has definitely been on top of. There's no examples in recent history of blatant lying taking place on platforms such as One News and misrepresentation of facts to push a certain agenda. That never happened under the BSA's watch in New Zealand, totally not. But it's very interesting to me that the framing that was made of those who are cautiously concerned regarding online content that has AI and misinformation versus some politicians and members of the public. I can tell you right now that there are politicians within Parliament who agree with the BSA, who want the BSA to have these powers. And for stuff to just leave that out is quite alarming. And it also tries to frame this as a reasonable action that is getting pushback from minor parties such as ACT and NZ First. The other concern that was shown in that clip was regarding the government's official response, in which the three options that they could consider dealing with this, how they can ignore it and leave it to the courts to decide whether this is in the jurisdictions of the BSA, which was option 1. Option 2 is amending legislation in order to define what the BSA could hold accountability for on New Zealand's internet. And the third, having the BSA absolutely removed altogether. And the last option sounds like that could be a potential win. It's nice to see people like Winston Peters and David Seymour support the pushback of the dramatic overreach that is taking place. But however, my concern is that that still leaves the door open for infringements to take place moving forward. What can we see overseas that shows governments are not going to stop at a small hiccup to do as much as they can to gain control? And this reminded me of a video I watched the other day, and I just got a couple clips from it. So I just want to play some of this and see what you guys think.
Take a look at this. So last year, a couple of states in the US introduced bills to ban VPNs, specifically Michigan and Wisconsin. Michigan never went further with the vote, but Wisconsin came very close of implementing it actually. Reclaim the Net on X wrote, Wisconsin lawmakers want to ban VPNs in the name of, quote-unquote, protecting children. Their new bills would force adult sites to verify ages and block anyone using encryption to stay private. It's a fantasy of control, a moral crusade that treats privacy like a crime. VPNs aren't the problem. They are how journalists, activists, and regular people stay safe online. If this passes, Wisconsin won't be protecting kids. It will be outlawing anonymity and building a blueprint for digital surveillance. Now,
so that's just a very small clip. I'll link the video in the description. But that's what it made me think of. It made me think of what's been happening overseas. I'm going to show you another clip now that is a little bit closer to home, as it's taking place in the UK instead of the United States, which has a far similar law to New Zealand compared to the Constitution written in the United States. And it's just another thing to think about when we're talking about overall regulation with New Zealand's internet usage. So let's just jump into that,
The Online Safety Act now mandates that websites, streaming services, and mobile apps that host adult material must implement robust age checks. This is all designed to stop those under 18 from accessing inappropriate content. Once again, they're treating people like idiots. Shape. But here's old Keir Starmer arguing that parents everywhere in Britain are shouting, "Will the government not restrict our freedom a little more? Won't you save us, please, Keir Starmer?"
I don't think there's a parent in the country who isn't worried about this, by the way. I really don't. Everybody's worried. And they feel, how am I supposed to police this on my own as a parent? And it's very, very difficult. And we as a government need to be up there alongside parents, providing leadership and support for them when it comes to social media. And we will. Nobody can make the argument that things can be left as they are. They can't, they're not protective of children, and we intend to act. But what we're doing now is taking the powers available to make sure at the end of that consultation we can move really fast. Because what can happen with governments, you saw it with the last government, we had an Online Safety Act, which is good because it restricts what's available online. The trouble is it took 8 years from the original idea to get to an outcome. We can't have 8 years when it comes to social media and whether we ban it or massive restrictions in place. So we've taken the powers now, we're taking the powers to make sure we can act within months.
So that, to me, is just a couple of examples, and there are a lot more overseas. The EU has taken some major steps in the last decade regarding how they regulate the internet and the requirements of using the internet, and the steps that they want to take moving forward can be quite scary once you start reading into. There's a lot of good arguments on trying to regulate the internet. And that is what they're banking on. They're banking on that you care about children, and they're banking on that you care about things like misinformation, and you care about the safety of the people around you. And those are the justifications for moving forward with these steps to regulate and to hold people accountable online. This is what I would argue is the beginning of the end. From my perspective, the internet was a mistake. It was a mistake to be released to the public. It was a mistake for everyday citizens to have access to the internet. The internet has produced independent platforms that produce media, that have influence, and that go head to head with the established media and those in power who used to have a monopoly on the content produced to the public, where everything published had to be run through an editor and made its way out the chain from newspapers to broadcasts to radio. This world is a world that they very much miss, and they are going to take every step they can to bring back that control. And what we're seeing with the BSA is that is the only legal legislation that they've got to stand on to try produce this outcome. And that is why we are seeing the BSA take these steps today. It has nothing to do with the safety of children. It has nothing to do with the quote-unquote misinformation that is produced by individuals online. The market of ideas is the best avenue to getting rid of misinformation. The ability to have open conversation is the only way to sort through all the bullshit that's online and the bullshit that's in traditional media and everything you hear. You know, it's a really unsettling reality that these global trends that we are seeing taking place around the world, which started in what we would consider dystopian realities like China, are now seeding into our day-to-day lives, and we're watching this take place with the BSA right now. This is a very concerning step that's made, and from the pushback that we've seen by the public, I would imagine that the next steps is going to either clip the wings of the BSA or completely destroy it, and use that as a distraction to slowly set up other regulations and a potential new branch of the government to transfer those bureaucrats over and to then regulate on a backbone that has a legal ability within New Zealand's court systems. That's my personal prediction. And we need to be very aware of what's taking place. Without a ratified constitution and without any protections of our Bill of Rights, we need to be very cautious of the steps taken over the next decade and how the government decides to moderate and enforce its ideals onto the population. I hope to see that we continue to push back and call out these steps and to keep this at bay for at least as long as we can, until we have legislation that enforces and protects the voices of the people, not only online but also in their day-to-day lives. But the reality is that the global trends that we're seeing today, particularly across Western democracies, is that those rights are being taken away, one small step at a time. It is a slow turn up of the dial, and we're slowly boiling the frog. And it is being advertised as steps to keep people safe and to stop this misinformation campaign that is being pushed all over the world to destabilize. The reality is the market of ideas would deal with those. And what we're seeing is a government try to control what it used to have absolute authority over. And that very much scares me, and I hope that you think about that the next time you see a petition show up regarding the actions that the government might take to regulate online platforms. And just to give a little bit of, be a bit of a devil's advocate here, I do understand the need to restrict children using social media in particular, but also other online platforms. The reality is that we have a industry that was built off the back of people who are maximizing profit. They literally hired people from the gambling industry to program and set up the platforms that are used today to suck your attention dry. And overuse of those platforms have a literal change of brain chemistry that takes place. And if that happens when you're in your development years, it can cause permanent effects that can sometimes require medication to try solve. And that is not a world that we want our youth or any adult to be forced into. And the responsibility for that to be mitigated, I personally believe, is on the parents and on the individuals themselves. And being aware that if you use social media as a platform for consumption instead of a platform as a tool, and use it within the means of, well, as you would anything, right? Too much of anything can be a bad thing. And if we find ourselves in a world where everyone is on their device 24/7, there won't be much of a world left to live for. And that's what we're seeing today. I'm not sure if you've jumped into the suicide rates of Gen Z, but I highly recommend a deep dive one day when you're bored, because I don't know what to tell you. When you have suicide rates that are worse than the generation that had to fight in World War II, you got something's definitely wrong. It's not just a bunch of pussies. I can definitely tell you that. Anyway, so that's the first topic today that I wanted to cover. I believe that this is very important for the future of New Zealand. I believe that we can take the necessary steps to support parents and to support households to regulate and mitigate the impact of online content on particularly the youth, whilst also not handing over control to the government. Because once we hand over those tools, and once they are in the hands of that government, doesn't matter who's in charge, we're going to have to pry it out of their cold, dead hands to get it back. That's the only way you can get back power from an institution, particularly a government institution, is revolution. But anyway, so the other topic we're going to be covering today is New Zealand's fuel crisis. Obviously, this is a global thing, and to be fair on the current government, it's not technically their fault. what's taking place in the Middle East, particularly with the war that was started by Donald Trump and his US administration under the influence of Israel. But how we react to that is on the New Zealand government. How we prepared for this inevitable outcome is on the New Zealand government. And if I could tell that war in the Middle East was on its way, I'm sure people we pay to be in those seats knew it was coming too. And yet here we are scrambling at the last second with no real answers to what happens if we get cut off by the refinery giants across the Asia Pacific due to supply constraints. So before we get too much into it, I've got a couple clips today, and let's just jump right in and see what I have to say.
So obviously there's a balance to be struck. Just to give you some monetary context, we bring in about $8 billion worth of fuel a year. Just in diesel, we chew through about 12 million litres a day. We derive that fuel from refineries such as Singapore, where nigh on 34%, according to this document which we got done several years ago. We are absolutely confident in the quality of the data we are receiving from the fuel import companies. They are regularly updating what they are in the business of contracting, what is being filled in the various Southeast Asian ports, and what's on international waters, what's in our sovereign waters. But our focus not only is about demonstrating to the public that we've been proactive and we have a level of preparation which is being completed in a collaborative way so we avoid the perfidy of COVID, but we will leave no stone unturned to ensure that we can secure the necessary supply in collaboration with the firms that we rely upon to bring the fuel to New Zealand.
So that was from the New Zealand Herald with the government addressing what you can expect moving forward from the fuel crisis. We all know, generally speaking, what's happening. Fuel prices have gone up. They're not going to cut taxes. It's a way to regulate how much fuel that we use on a day-to-day basis, which, I don't actually really argue with. What I wanted to point out in that clip was pretty much all our government is doing is having conversations with private entities to make sure that we can get our fuel. That's the bulk of it. All of our fuel estimates are based on what's on the water and what's been bought. It's not what's being stored. And there's a very, very specific reason why that language is being used. Because we don't actually have an option in this country to store fuel. We don't even have our own New Zealand oil tanker fleet to make sure that ships are being prioritised to come back to this country. We are at the complete mercy of what our dollar is worth overseas. And I don't know if you've been paying attention over the last decade, but COVID kind of smacked us. And it wasn't even looking that great before then. And our answer that we've been provided by this government is that they're doing the best they can to keep us in the good books. We have no leverage. Our only leverage is that we produce food, which, to the government's credit, which has apparently produced an agreement with Singapore that we would prioritize food to them and they would prioritize fuel to us, which is good news. However, this sounds like all we're doing is regulating trade. What are the actual steps that are taking place to secure fuel for this country moving forward, other than using New Zealand's tax dollars to make sure that we have a genuine fuel supply? And I'm not even worried about petrol. If we run out of petrol, we'll figure it out. It will be miserable, but it is what it is. It's if we run out of diesel. It's if the tractors aren't running anymore. It's if trucks can't get around the country. If our ferries have to shut down. If we can't operate as an economy, New Zealand is more than stuffed. It is a dystopian future that we're all concerned about. And the government keeps telling us to, don't worry about it. She'll be all right, mate. Don't stress. Don't hold us accountable. And I've got a couple more clips coming up that's going to dive into a little bit more detail of what we could expect moving forward and what could have been done to help mitigate the crisis we're currently in. So let's jump in, eh? This is from a Q&A clip. So this is going to be very interesting.
Right. So under that National Fuel Plan framework, what would be the real world threshold for rationing?
If we saw that we were going to approach a period where we knew that the incoming supply would not be sufficient to meet normal needs, at that point we would decide whether we needed to elevate the alert level in the fuel plan and start moving to preventative measures. So that would be things like saying, right, at petrol stations around the country, we're going to have to prioritise getting fuel in for our health staff, for our emergency services, for freight that's essential, and we would need to make sure that we're working with the fuel companies to make sure they can get distribution of fuel across the country. You wouldn't want a situation where, for example, the cities were being served with fuel but the regions weren't, so we would work to cooperate much more closely with the industry. Then beyond that, if those measures were not seen as sufficient, then you could start looking at some of the things like saying, well, here's the maximum that people are allowed to buy on a day, here are some restrictions on what top-ups they can have, so that we could have some degree of control to stop that kind of panic buying.
Right, so that price wouldn't be the only mechanism by which you controlled supply and managed supply around the country. So are detailed plans for those scenarios being drawn up now?
Yes, they are. So as I said, we've got a national fuel plan. It's a 79-page document if you want to go and look it up. We published that in 2024. That provides a framework. What officials are now doing is saying, well, that envisages a range of different scenarios. Given we've got specific information about this scenario, let's put these details over the top of it and start considering at what point we would make which choices.
Okay, so that to me is also a very interesting clip. The reason why that clip stood out to me during that interview is what we were essentially told is if we cannot secure fuel supply for the foreseeable future at the capacity that is required for day-to-day life, that we will start seeing restrictions on day-to-day life and what would be classified as necessary to keep the economy going. That is hopefully something that we're not going to have to see. It just kind of reminds me of COVID in a way, though. And to be fair, a completely different reason. And I do understand that when resources get genuinely low, we have to be able to prioritize things for like hospitals and police and food. I get it. I worked at Pack and Saves during the COVID pandemic. I was one of the few people out on the road during the level 4 lockdowns in Auckland. My concern is that we have to even make these plans in the first place. That New Zealand is not in a position to make sure that ships actually come here. We're not in a position to process our own diesel from crude oil. We used to be able to, and we're going to jump in a little bit more on the next clip regarding that. And you'd think that if we couldn't have any refineries, the least we could do is make sure that there was a bloody cargo ship available so that we could guarantee that that ship was only coming to and from New Zealand. Those are some steps that I've seen from the Australian government take place, as they have many concerns regarding their collapse in their refinery situation. At least their government was able to pull together and fix up a Australian fleet of fuel tankers so that those fuel tankers can be just for Australia's fuel supply. Something that we don't even have. That to me is a national security risk and should be at top priority for a country that taxes as much as it does. And don't tell me we can't afford it. This government's been spending more than the previous government. And I understand that prep takes time and it's not all on this current government. But as you're about to see, there definitely could have been more done. So let's jump into that now, eh?
After Marsden Point closed in 2022, Cabinet knew 21 days of diesel wasn't enough, so they knew this, and they agreed to fix it, an extra 7-day public reserve, 70 million litres, a buffer for exactly the kind of crisis that we're now in. Officials moved, MB issued proposals, and the plan was real, and it was ready, right? So that was all set up. And then, what happened? What do we know what happened? Nothing happened. Labor failed to fund it. They kicked the can down the road, basically left it sitting there. Labor, it's true, can take much of the blame here. There's no doubt about that. But this government that is currently in office also had their chance to sort it because they were given this hospital pass upon arriving into office. They picked it up. They talked big about resilience, but also it went nowhere. In black and white, it's all there. It's in the documents. They had a chance. They didn't. Shane Jones signed the cabinet paper. Too expensive. Scrap it, basically. $84 million was the cost that was put on at the time. That was the price of the insurance package, I suppose. And here's the killer line, and the one that now reads like a bit of a warning ignored. Cancelling the reserve would leave New Zealand vulnerable to a diesel disruption until at least 2028, was the warning. So they knew.
So, just for context, let's round it up. $90 million to extend our reserves and to have the capacity to be more resilient in an environment like this. The current spending is $2.4 billion with a B per year. If we continue the current subsidies for lower class families to support them during this fuel crisis of about that $50 a week, if we continue that program for a full year, that will cost around $400 million. What, about a seventh of the cost of running the government yearly? That oversight has directly impacted the fuel cost for this country. It has directly made us more susceptible to what's taking place today and giving more leverage to the world economy to take advantage of how vulnerable we are as a nation. Just think about that. Anyway, let's keep going.
Then comes the second failure, which was Marsden Point itself. And again, those media that I mentioned have done some great work here. We're told nothing could be done. It's not quite true. Officials confirmed the refinery could have been kept as emergency capacity. Not efficient, not pretty, but in a crisis, it would run indefinitely. Enough to keep ambulances moving, food on the shelves, that sort of emergency response. And that option existed. And it was overlooked. It was ignored. Even now, tanks at Marsden Point, and Shane Jones has said to me recently that half of them are rusted out, but some tanks at Marsden Point could be brought back online within months. Tens of millions of litres of storage sitting right there. We were told they were rusting out. Some of them are, but not all of them, you see. Again, the option was not taken. And now we hit the absurdity that the government is quietly preparing to tap emergency fuel stored offshore in the UK, US, Japan. They've said we can bring Russian fuel in as well.
So, once again, I understand that the closing was under Labor. That Marsden Point was scrapped under them. And that was along with the other bills of banning oil exploration, which is now also biting us in the ass. And I understand that. But this current government was given the option to maintain the storage facilities so that we could hold more fuel within our borders, which is the national security risk that could have mitigated what's taking place today. That, to me, is a necessity of a government. The fact that we have to run around the world to access reserves that aren't even on our own shore and potentially reach out to people like Vladimir Putin in order to have fuel security absolutely boggles my mind. Something else that a lot of people don't consider when thinking about the fuel crisis is that petrol and diesel have an expiry date. And I'm pretty sure petrol's around 6 months, diesel's a little bit more than that. And then it goes off. Crude oil does not. Crude oil can just sit there. Crude oil can be brought in mass amounts and then can be processed when needed. Almost like if we had a refinery in place that ran at minimum capacity to keep everything functional, and then if we saw the dominoes start to fall over and preparation start to take place for, I don't know, a conflict in the Middle East, we could run around then and buy up as much crude oil as possible so that we could mitigate the impact of the global economy being smashed by a sledgehammer. Once again, steps that could be taken that weren't taken. And you got to start thinking, why weren't they taken? From a perspective of somebody who wants the best for New Zealand, even if you're fully behind the green initiative and want to leave oil behind, we also understand that oil is still essential for the day-to-day operations of our economy and that we need to slowly phase that out over time. And until that has taken place, hopefully in a way that is organic, so that the economy can keep up without putting excess costs on people like farmers, we would make sure that we could do them as much as we can as a country to keep us in a position so we can continue to support and reduce the cost of living increases that would take place in a global conflict like we are now. And yes, I'm talking global. I'm talking about the build-up that has taken place since Ukraine. Since the Ukraine oil's been taken off the shelves for most of the West, which, to be fair, is starting to turn around now because they need their oil, which is pretty funny to think about. And now the Middle East is not secure once again. Who would have thought the United States and Israel would muck around in the Middle East again? It's not like they've had decades and decades worth of history to prove that they're going to try and get as much control in that place as they possibly can. New Zealand is in the corner of the planet, and we are very low on the priority list. And what the government doesn't like to tell you is that one of the easiest things to replace in your trade around the world is food. There are some very specific examples that go against that, like Singapore, who don't have the space to maintain their population size. But generally speaking, most countries around this planet can generate their own food resources to at least sustain their current population. Our bargaining chip is short and sweet, and even the highest quality will not matter if they have to prioritize their own dollar. And what we're seeing now is we are getting slowly pushed out of the priority ladder, and we are now paying the price of not having our own infrastructure and our own capacity to be resilient in a global economy that is shifting. Our world is not going to be the way it is for much longer. The way I'd like to compare it is the pre-World War II trading system. Before World War II, before we had this global police of the United States, trade had to be secured and had to be policed by the countries that were doing that trade. Countries that could rely on external forces to do that, like those who sat under the British Empire, benefited immensely during this period of time. Whereas any trade with the UK was essentially gated by its immense naval force. That changed after World War II. And the whole world has benefited from an open global economy where you can pretty much trade with anybody, and it has definitely produced some stellar results in cost of living. However, in saying that, it has also produced a world where all the countries have had to start relying on each other. Not all of them made those fatal mistakes. For example, the United States. A lot of their manufacturing has been pushed overseas, but the reality is that they have the backbone to reinvest that back into their own borders. And that's what we're seeing right now, particularly with chips manufactured for technology. They're spending billions of dollars to get technology infrastructure back into its own country and for preparation of what's to come. We are seeing shifts in the global economy that have been taking place for quite a while now, pretty much since the end of the Cold War. And New Zealand has done nothing but commit to this globalized agenda. And we are now paying for it. And all you have to do is look around to see how that has negatively impacted this country. How brands that used to belong to this nation are no longer owned by Kiwis. How we used to build cars in local towns that are no longer manufactured here, just imported at an extreme cost. We don't produce our own diesel or petrol anymore. And the more industries you look into, the more you figure out that we rely on external forces to operate in day-to-day life. And what scares me the most is that is what the establishment, what I classify as the establishment powers, that's exactly what they want. They want us to have no leverage like we do right now with this fuel crisis. They want to have all the control and all the power, just like how the BSA is trying to undo what the internet opened up for us. And just like how right now we're on our knees to global institutions to make sure our economy can keep running so that our lights stay on and our food continues to make it to its shelves. I'm going to leave you with that, something to think about. And thank you very much for joining me today on aKiwisProspective. I would love to hear what you think about this episode, so please like, comment. Our goal is to get to 100 followers, as that is the threshold in order to start live streaming, which is my ultimate goal. I would love to start interacting with the audience and seeing what people have to say whilst I'm saying it. As I've said before, the goal here is to ignite conversation and to get people thinking more about the implications of the decisions made by those we put in power and by those who have paid to be there. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you on the next episode.